Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth tutorial in the C# beginner tutorial series. Today is going to be a very cool tutorial because we're going to talk about one of the most important elements of programming, which is variables and functions. You might have heard these words bandied around in another context, and their meaning is kind of the same, but in programming they have a very definitive meaning. So let me kind of give you a bit of inspiration as to why these things are so important. Basically all software that you can think of relies on being able to do what it needs to do with virtually any input you give it. So the simplest example is a calculator. Think how rubbish a calculator would be if you could only add certain numbers, for example. The utility of the calculator is that it can do certain things to any combination of numbers, apart from dividing by zero. Think about Microsoft Word, for example. The beauty of Microsoft Word is that you can input any text and do all of the myriad of things that you can do in Word to that text. You can make it bold, italic, underline, make the font bigger, all this kind of stuff. The driving thing behind software is its sort of freedom to do what it does with any input, any valid input, I guess. So, for example, thinking about the calculator, the calculator itself cannot know what actual numbers you're doing. If you're going to have to add all numbers, you couldn't hard code every single case. You couldn't hard code 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 2 = 3, because you'd be there till kingdom come and beyond. What the code needs is a general way to deal with any number. And if you recall from our last lesson, we started talking about ways that you can tell the computer that you have a number or a string or anything like that. And so combining this idea with what we studied last time, we can come up with a system that will let us be very general about how we take the data that we're manipulating and do whatever needs to be done to it. So let me continue with actually some code, because it might be a lot simpler where we're seeing some actual code. So I'm probably going to be using the console again here. So to declare a variable, there are certain things you have to do, and if you don't do them, then the computer will complain and you'll probably get a compile error. In fact, you almost always will get a compile error. So to begin with, I think I want to let the user type in their name on the console, and then we'll spit back a message. How about that? That's a good idea. And now, because we don't want to have to deal with every single name that's available, we don't care. The name isn't important. All that matters is that they've inputted something. And then we're just going to spit it straight back at them with a nice message. So actually, we don't care what name they've inputted. We just care that they have inputted some text. So the way to declare a variable is you have to tell the computer its type to begin with. That's always the first thing you have to do. So because we're taking text, our type is going to be a string. This is great. Now, what we have to do is we have to give our variable a name. Now, this name has nothing to do with its actual value. It's merely a way that we can reuse the variable in our code. Now, this is something I really struggled with when I first started, because I thought the name was important somehow. But actually, in terms of the information, the type and the value you set it to are the most important things in terms of making it work. I'm not saying the name isn't important. Giving things good names is a very good habit to get into when you're doing programming. you should always try and give your variables sensible names, but the name is just something that you use throughout the rest of the code. It doesn't relate to the value of the object. So we're going to be taking in a name. So a good name for our variable, which is storing the name the person's inputted, is name. Let's call it name. So now we told the computer, I'm declaring a variable called name, which is a string. And now we need to give it a value. And we can give it a value using the equals sign. We're saying string name equals whatever value's on the right hand side. So we need to get the name from what they've inputted. And if you didn't know how to do that, imagine you were a software developer and you didn't know how to do this, the first place you turn to is the internet. So don't be alarmed that there's this sort of extra knowledge you need to know. Let me prove it to you. Let's go on the internet. You type in something like that. You type in the problem that you're dealing with, and the first thing that would come up would be a very useful piece of documentation. This is saying you can use console.readline, read to the next line of characters from the standard input stream. That means the console. So great, let's do that. Console.readline, we can see it's in there already. Now, if you use this a lot, you'd gradually just remember it and you wouldn't need to go on the internet. But again, like, don't be put off if you see things and go, oh my God, how am I supposed to know that? Generally, the internet is your friend. And we can also see the same piece of documentation here, which is great. So what we're saying now is we want our variable name, which is a string, to be equal to whatever text is on the first line. Now, I am going to stick in a breakpoint here, and I'm going to prove to you that is actually what's happening. And then we're going to do some stuff with the variable. So let's put those breakpoints in there, and let's run the program. Give it a second to build. It shouldn't take too long, hopefully. Okay, right, so what's happening now is it's waiting for us to type some text in. So here we go. So we've got to this line, and now if we continue, it's it's now waiting for us to type some text in. So I'm going to type my name in. We can see it's carried on, and now if you hover over the variable, you can see its value is Alan. It's taken in what we've typed from the console, which is great. We've managed to get some data in and not know what it is, and we don't care about it. It's wonderful. So let's flesh this out a bit more. Now, you may be wondering what this is, and I realize that I've actually failed to mention it. This is called a function, and functions and variables are very closely related. Variables store data, and functions either give you data or do something with data. They're incredibly tightly coupled. So for example, this function is saying, right, from the console, I want to read the next line. And you can see there it says, read the next line of characters, blah, 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 blah. And above it is this sort of strange definition. It says string console.readline. And what that's saying is it's returning a string, and console.readline is how you call the function. You can see up here we have another function called void main. And this is another interesting function, because what it's actually doing is not returning anything. So functions can return values and they can take in values. And that's how they kind of act and give you back data. If they're returning something, they're giving you back data. If they take in stuff, they're acting on data or using that data. So console.readLine returns a string, but doesn't take in anything. Void main, you can see, it's telling us how to call it. Doesn't actually return anything. This is how you tell a computer you don't want to return anything, void main. But it's taking in some data, and what these are called are parameters. Now, there's a lot of buzzwords coming in here, and I totally appreciate that, but I will keep repeating them throughout the video, so don't worry if you don't remember them. They will keep coming up and keep coming up, and if you forget what they mean, Google them or write a comment. Don't worry about it. So what a function returns is its return type, and what it takes in are its parameters. So the return type for readline is string, it doesn't take in any parameters. Return type for main is void, aka nothing, and it takes in some strings, some text. Now, you may be wondering why, if readline doesn't take in anything, why it doesn't have this. And the answer is laziness, and it's sort of unnecessary. Programmers are lazy, and they don't want to have to type in void every time they don't want to pass anything in. So yeah, that's why that's that. So now, to kind of give you a flavor of how the variables and the functions work together, we're gonna make our own function. So first and foremost, we're gonna say void show greeting. Now again, you can call a function anything you like, absolutely anything you like. This is the function's name. It has nothing to do with its actual functionality, but it's a name representing what the function is doing. So you could call this func if you wanted to, and it would be perfectly valid, and you could call it and it would do what it does, but it wouldn't be very informative. In the same way that we could call this S, but anyone reading our code wouldn't really know what it's supposed to represent. So it's much better if you give things names which actually represent what they're doing. It might seem really boring, but actually I promise you, when you come back to this code in a week's time or whatever, you'll go, oh, what was that doing again? And just reading the names really helps to figure that out. So this function, we're not going to take anything in. It's going to have no parameters, and it's not going to return anything because it doesn't need to. This function is going to write some fancy text to the console to kind of tell the player, tell the user what they need to do. And that whole greeting behavior is going to be totally encapsulated in this function. This function is going to take care of that, and it's going to be great. So to define a function, you say what it returns, you give it a name, and you have these two brackets, and in here you type in any parameters you needed, like number, string, but we don't need any, so we need no parameters. And then you have these two curly braces, and these just tell the computer where the function begins and ends. So everything between these two curly braces is going to belong to the show greeting function, and they're going to run when the show greeting function is called. So we need to write something to the console that tells the user what this is doing and what they need to do. Luckily, off the top of my head, I remember that there's a function called WriteLine, and it says there's a lot of different versions, but the one we want is in here. We go. Writes the specified string value followed by the current line terminated to the standard output stream. Translating this means writes a string to the console. it writes a line. I mean, that's a great name, right? That's where naming is really useful. If that had been called func1, we wouldn't have known what it did. But console.WriteLine, very informative. Now we can see that this function doesn't return anything, but it does require an input string. So you can see in the string value, that's just the name for the parameter that you need to put in. And it's got to be a string, and then the comments say, writes the specified string value. So it writes the value you're inputting. So what should we input? Remember how you define a string is using open quotes, open and close quotes, double quotes. Got there eventually. So we'll write something like, hello, please enter your name. Right, so we're going to call this other function with this string parameter. And yes, you can call functions in functions, that's totally allowed. It might seem confusing, it's not. Don't worry about it, you'll get very used to it, I promise you that. Now, I missed off a thing. I will explain that probably in another video. That is for another time. Don't worry about it for now. But yeah, make sure you have the word static there. Okay, so remember, our program runs from top to bottom. So we're going to come in here, we're going to show the greeting, going to get the name, and then we're going to wait for a key press before we exit. So right now what's happening is the message we've said is going to be shown to the console, and we're then going to take in whatever name they've inputted. Now we ideally want another thing here. So let's make another function. So we need a name for this function, and we need to know what this function is going to do. So this is going to take in the name, and it's going to say something like, hello, whatever, I'm Alan. Or I'm the computer. So we need a name. And let's call it useName, because I can't think of a better name. And because we need the player's name that they've inputted, I keep saying that, user, because we need the user's name that they've inputted, we're going to need a parameter. So again, we can give this parameter any name that we like. We want it to be a type string because it's their name, and we can call it name. We could call it absolutely anything. We could call it func1 again, but it really does help to name things properly. So this is going to take in their name, and we're going to write again to the console. I'm going to say hello, and now this is where we need their name, and we've become a little bit unstuck because their name is in this variable, and we need to add it to this new piece of text so that it appears as one nice message. Now, luckily, and you're not expected to know this because I'm about to tell you, the computer lets you combine strings together. That's a totally valid thing for you to do. That's absolutely fine. It loves it. So actually what we can do is we can combine these two bits of text together. And the way we do that is with the plus symbol. So we can do this. We can write hello plus name, and this will take these two strings, and it's called concatenate. We're going to put one on the end of the other. We're going to put name on the end of the hello space string, and then it will just show one string. So great, we can carry on. We can carry on concatenating strings. We can carry on adding all these strings together to make one really nice message. So we'll go hello, player's name, and then we'll say, give it a full stop, I'm the computer. So now we can do this. So this is going to show a greeting message, read their name in after they've typed it, and then show a message using that name. You see here, the way we've written these functions, that's called calling the function. If you hover over it, you can see kind of this is how you would call it. So we could also write it out like this, program.usename, but we can save a bit of time. I'll get into all of this extra stuff in another lesson, like what this means and why it was programmed. I will get into that, but I want to concentrate on the variables and functions right now. So if we run this, do you think that's what's going to happen? I'm fairly hopeful, but I'm not 100% sure because, as with any demo, stuff can always go wrong. Okay, great. So we've got our text message. That's happened because we called the show greeting function. And now it's waiting for our name. And there you can see that the useName function has successfully combined the player's name with our text. So we've actually been able to talk to the person who is using this as if we knew their name with no actual knowledge of what their name is. Seen here, like, we have no idea what their actual name is. And that's the beauty of variables. You could keep entering names here. You could enter another name, Fred Blogs, and it will just work. And that is the beauty of variables. Rather than dealing with every case, we can generalize and just say, yeah, let's just use this string, use this variable of a string, and then process that throughout our application. It's wonderful. It's such a cool, nifty idea, and it makes everything so elegant. Can you imagine if we'd had to deal with every single name in here? I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about. So this is really great. We've managed to write this nice console application which is using the player's name without us knowing anything about it. And that is sort of variables and functions in a nutshell. So the last thing I want to get into is kind of good coding practices. And this is a really, really difficult topic. Not in terms of understanding it, but just because it's very opinion based. So you might be starting to get a sense of how there's more than one way to do certain things in code. For example, we could take this. We could take this thing, which is keeping it open after we've finished processing everything, and we could put it in the useName function. And now the code looks slightly different, but it will do the same thing. So you might start to go, oh God, how do I know where to put the right things? And that is a really excellent question. And it's something I will try and kind of guide you on. But also, programmers write code in different styles, and sometimes there's no right answer. So yeah, it's very difficult, but I'm going to try and show you some good practices along the way. So for example, a very, very good philosophy to stick by is a function does a specific thing. Try and put code in a function that kind of relates to what it does. So for example, the show greeting function shows our greeting. Now we could maybe do this in here and get it to return the name as well. So now we've swapped our functions around. So actually the show greeting function returns the name. But the show greeting function shows a message greeting the player. It doesn't really have anything to do with taking in their name. It's more about just displaying a piece of text. So I think it's better if it has no knowledge about that process. And actually the show greeting function is just responsible for showing some kind of static greeting text or whatever you want to do to greet the player as they've just loaded up. And then maybe leave the reading in of the name somewhere else. Similarly with the use name. The use name is taking in a name and doing something with it. But I don't think it's appropriate that it should be performing this line of code, for example, like controlling other parts of the program, like leaving the terminal open. In general, if you have your functions doing very specific jobs, you can also reuse them. So for example, we could call show greeting here again, if we wanted to. And that would, you know, we can keep reusing these functions because they do certain jobs. The more stuff you bundle into one function, the less reusable it becomes unless you need it to do that exact specific things. So yeah, keep your functions very specialized, doing one particular job, and you'll find that they become quite useful and reusable, and your code is very clear and nice. The other thing, and I've banged on about it today already, is naming is so important. I hope that you one day never have to encounter poorly named code, but you might, and it's really irritating. For example, if we'd called this function don't show greeting, but actually it shows the greeting, you would, if you didn't know where this function was, imagine it was somewhere completely different and you just had this piece of code. You'd go, oh, okay, so this is not showing a greeting and then using the name. And you'd run it and you'd see that it actually is showing a greeting, and you go, what the hell? And you'd realize that someone has named the function incredibly poorly so that it's like the exact opposite of what it's doing. Oh, I feel like I'm banging on and I'm probably gonna wrap it up, but yeah. The most important thing to remember is name things properly, and variables and functions are awesome and we will carry on using them. This is only designed as an introduction to the topic. They're bread and butter, so we'll be using them. You'll get very familiar with them. I promise you will. If you haven't processed everything, don't worry. You'll become very familiar with them purely by usage over the next couple of videos. So yeah, don't worry about it if you haven't processed everything. It will keep coming as you keep using these things more. I promise you that. I promise you that. So I think next week we're going to try and make something a little bit more useful than just taking a name and spitting it out. Maybe deal with some different types and using more complicated functions. So that's going to be great. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, if you've got questions about stuff that's happened in previous videos, just write a comment, I'll get back to you. And I hope this has been useful. If you're struggling, please get in touch and try and keep soldering on, because with programming there's always a hump and life seems really hard as you work your way up, and then eventually you'll get to the top and it's downhill from then on. I promise you, it's downhill. So yeah. Keep going, there's always hope. Thank you very much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.